Well, good afternoon and welcome to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and to Nebraska Innovation Campus for the last of our 2014-2015 Hermann Lecture Series events for the year. The Hermann Lectures are a part of the Institute of Ag and Natural Resources at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. We're now finishing our fourth year of this series that focuses on food, fuel, water, rural security, rural landscape security, and all of the issues that go into and feed into our food system and the natural resources that we use in it. My name is Ronnie Green, and I have the pleasure and privilege of serving as the Vice Chancellor of INR here at UNL. And I would like to start our afternoon today by introducing to you Keith and Norma Hermann, for whom the Hermann Lectures are named, generous benefactors for us in helping us stage this international lecture series the last several years. From Phillips, Nebraska, long-time involvement in the production agriculture industry and in the popcorn industry and the seed industry from Nebraska. So please join me in thanking Keith and Norma Hermann. Norma tells me that Keith just celebrated a very special birthday. I'll leave it to you to figure out which one that was, but we're really glad to have them with us today. I'm very pleased that today's lecture, as all of these are, is being streamed online and aired live on Channel 5. And you might know that several of our lectures are publicized and put on through Nebraska Educational Television. Throughout the year, you'll see past lectures occurring there, as well as all of our previous lectures are archived online on the Hermann Lectures website. Today, we are particularly pleased to welcome Dr. Rob Fraley to our campus. Rob is the Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer for Monsanto. He is well known in the plant biotechnology world. And I'm sure you'll gather that from what he has to say here to you today, one of the very early pioneers in plant biotechnology and its applications to crop production, particularly around the world. He leads the company's global technology division that includes plant breeding, plant biotechnology, ag biologicals, ag microbials, precision agriculture, and crop protection. Just a few years ago, I think 2 years ago now, Dr. Fraley was one of three of the pioneers in biotechnology that was recognized with the 2013 World Food Prize, jointly awarded by the World Food Prize Group in Iowa. He's the fourth World Food Prize laureate to come to the stage for the Hermann Lectures. Previously, Catherine Bertini, Peer Pinstrup Anderson, and Dr. R.M. Swaminathan from India have been part of our Hermann Lectures panels. He also is the recipient of the National Medal of Technology from President Clinton in 1998, the National Academy of Sciences Award for the Industrial Application of Science for his work on crop improvement, also in 2008, among many other recognitions. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Rob Fraley, Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer for Monsanto Corporation. Rob?
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Great to be here. What a facility. This is really special and a little bit intimidating to look up at all the folks here. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I get a chance to visit Nebraska quite often. The last time I was on campus, I think this whole site was still on the drawing board. So it's great to see it bring itself into fruition. And I get a chance to meet at a lot of different universities and faculty around the country. And I'm sure you realize how special it is to have a facility like this and to be able to have the investments in agriculture and food production. That's really great. I wanted to say thank you, Keith, and to your family for the opportunity to give a lecture in your name. It certainly reflects a lot on your commitment to agriculture, and thank you and Norma for making this possible. It's I think really an incredibly important time for all of us to understand both the challenges and the opportunities that face all of us, in the agriculture and food supply system and society at large. And I really thank you, and I feel very honored to be able to do this. One of the neat things of coming back to visit frequently is I've got a chance to connect with friends that I've known for years, and also the opportunity. And I took lots of notes today in terms of new connections and new opportunities for the future. So. I've really enjoyed it, and compared to the rainy day I spent in Champaign yesterday, this has been a spectacular day on campus. So what I'm going to do is start with a little bit of background and conversation, talk a lot about innovation, a little bit about communication and policy, and then hopefully, if I don't talk too slowly, we'll have plenty of opportunity to address some questions. And what I always like to do is make the point that I've had a chance of being in agriculture all my life. I grew up on a small family farm in Illinois, left my dad's farm in 1970 to go to college, had the opportunity to spend a couple of really pivotal postdoc years out in University of San Francisco in California when the biotech industry was really just developing, and then have spent a career at Monsanto, translating some of the innovations in biotech and breeding into helping crop production agriculture around the world. I can't remember though where there's been a more important, a more interesting, and a more challenging time in terms of the conversations around agriculture, and I think that's why the investments that you've made have been so important, because I think that this is a pivotal time for agriculture. You can look at it both ways. We are at the center of discussion of some of the most important conversations going on around water, around food security, around energy. We know the challenges that agriculture faces from many perspectives. And on the other hand, what I would tell you is there's probably never been a more exciting time to be in this industry in terms of the waves of innovation that are coming into agriculture and into the food chain. And now I think what's so important is that we have the appropriate discussions and dialogue around the acceptance of these innovations and the important role that they will play for food and energy security for the future. When you step back and you look at the fundamental drivers, world population continues to increase. 7.2 billion people today, probably 9.5 or 10 billion by 2050. World wealth increases, and that translates into better diets, better nutrition, more calories. The quick and simple math says that by 2050, the food supply needs to be doubled. That means we need to increase production, we need to preserve and conserve food, we need to reduce waste, but it's a huge challenge. Just to put it in perspective, that means over the next 30 years, we have to produce more food than's been produced in the entire history of the world. And we know we're going to have to do that with probably less land, less water allocated to agriculture, and face the vagaries that a changing climate will throw at us around the globe. And so that's key. And then the last one, and probably the one that I'll emphasize the most, is the important role and responsibility all of us have in the communication of this. Because we are a privileged group that really understands agriculture and food production. As we've been successful as an industry, fewer and fewer people come into direct contact with agriculture and food production. So our responsibility, to communicate, to reach out, so that we're making the right policy decisions for the right reasons, I don't think has ever been more important. I'll just focus on climate change as just one of the areas that's going to create both disruption and opportunity in agriculture. About 5 or 6 years ago, I commissioned a group of our senior scientists to go through the data, to look at what's going on with temperature, what does it mean as a company in terms of the areas and locations we need to invest in the future, literally from where should we locate our breeding stations to what are the kinds of evolving pest pressures that we need to address, and water utilization and all the other challenges. And one of the things that we concluded is that probably one of the biggest implications of just a small 1 or 2 degree change in temperature is the evolving nature of the pests and the insects and diseases that farmers face. And you know, there's probably no better case study on this than here in Nebraska. So if you look here at the hardiness map from from 1990 to today, so a little more than 20 years, you can see we've almost seen the entire state change in terms of that. And that means that the places where we breed our crops, literally the diseases that we select for in terms of resistance, the products and treatments has evolved very, very dramatically. You know, when I first joined Monsanto in 1981, I would not have believed that we would be breeding corn for southern Canada, but we are now breeding for millions of acres of corn and soybean production in Canada, and you can extend that all the way around to the Ukraine. And so the world is changing both in terms of challenge and opportunity. But I want to make it really, really clear up front. And, it's never a good idea to tell your whole story in the first few slides, but I am not one of those that's going to tell you that it's all gloom and doom and we're not going to make it. In fact, I would tell you just the opposite, that when you look at the path forward, I think it's clearer and clearer for everybody who's involved in the food chain. And over the last couple of years, I've had the opportunity to meet with lots of regulators, with lots of government officials, with lots of scientists, with lots of policymakers, heads of food companies, and it's clear that this challenge of doubling the food supply is one that creates common ground. And the path forward, I think, is how do we sustainably, intensively farm the land that we're farming today? How do we take pressure off of the marginal lands that probably should be returned into, wetlands or pastures or forests? How do we think about conserving food from a waste perspective? How do we become more efficient? And how do we take the land that we can farm sustainably and farm it more intensively, for the future? And that's a real key, and I think we can achieve it. And that means over the next 30 years, doubling yields in the U.S., tripling or quadrupling yields outside the U.S., and it will take all of us working together. And what excites me is that we have every opportunity to do this. This is a model that I've been working on and supported by analysis from a lot of folks in the academic and food chain. But basically it says, the blue line is world population. Continues to grow, starts to flatten off, by 9 or 10 billion people in 2050. Red line is what I think is possible from a food production and a food security perspective. We can, exceed and provide, food security for that growing planet. And in fact, every gain that we make in agricultural efficiency and productivity, with all of the future innovations that are going to come out of the research that you do and others around the world, simply drives that productivity to the point where we can be even more judicious in the lands that we farm. By 2050, we should be able to take 150 or 200 million acres out of global farming production, and again, rethink, our paths where we can achieve both security and enhance the environment. And I share that with you because that's my goal. I'm 62 years old, so I know how old I'm going to be in 2050. But this is what gets me up in the morning. This is what excites me, and it's the kind of world that I want to leave my 3 kids and their grandkids as a world that is food secure and where we've used our technology and innovation to literally enhance the planet. And the reason I believe it's possible is there's an absolute tidal wave of new innovation coming into agriculture. Innovations from the biology side, I mean literally the ability to breed based on the knowledge of every single gene in the crop, to use biotechnology tools to complement breeding with new genes and traits, and then a phenomenal set of innovations coming in from the world of data science and innovations that are going to come from from communication, technologies and information technologies that are really converging across all aspects of our science and our production agriculture. And so, there'll be new advances in crop protection and better ways of, controlling insects and diseases that we'll need in a changing climate. But clearly the advances in biology and data science and new platforms, being able to use these tools to understand soil health and the microbial ecology of literally every field, or new tools for, for intervening on the biology side that are absolutely incredible and breathtaking. Now, as the guy who started the biotech program at Monsanto and helped to invent some of the first products like Roundup Ready soybeans or Yield Guard corn, everybody expects me to jump right into the biotech discussion. But I'll tell you, looking back over the last 20 years, for me, the most remarkable impact of the biotech tools has been how these tools have literally changed breeding. And you step back and you say, that's a pretty bold statement. What I would tell you is breeding has changed more in the last 5 years than it has in the last 5,000 in terms of the tools and capabilities. And it really starts with the fact that today we know every single gene in a corn plant or a soybean plant and can use those tools to create combinations, to use genetic diversity, to map and tag genes from breeding programs around the world and utilize that to create advances in yield gain and trait attributes that has never been possible before. We literally today, when we're breeding, we're not only breeding gene by gene across those 40 or 50,000 genes in a crop genome, but we're able to do that and breed seed by seed to understand those extremely rare recombinants that can drive the yield gains for the future. And so that's an incredible capability that in our programs today, we're seeing doubling the historical rates of gain that breeders have seen for decades with the innovations that are possible. And that only will become more precise and more powerful as we continue to correlate the genes to the traits. And this aspect of this not only drives our yield and productivity, but being able to use that universe of breeding programs around the world and map and tag new genes from other sources to be, as an example, the new genes that we're developing for diseases like gray leaf spot or for Goss's wilt have come from breeding programs in Mexico, from Brazil, and other places around the world that have really driven not only the diversity of our germplasm, but also the tools that are going to be so critical as we address the ramifications of a changing climate for the future. And on the biotech front, I'll just say that, I look back and, if any of you would have asked me, back in the early '80s when we were first developed the methodologies to put genes in plants, that, I'd be, standing in front of this audience knowing now that, biotech crops are grown in almost 30 countries. They're imported, in another 40. They're touching almost 500 million acres of farmland, which is about a quarter of the world's farmland. I never would have believed it. But on the other hand, I wouldn't have thought, back in the '80s that we'd still be having some of the challenges we have on acceptance and on communication and on the debate that goes on around our food system. And I'll come back and talk and address that. So, we've seen prolific adoption, which I think, as we see more and more crops getting the benefit, more and more traits reaching markets around the world. Just in the yesterday, I think Nigeria voted to support GMO crops. Several countries in Africa and Asia are following suit. We're seeing the incredible opportunity, and that's exciting because one of the things that I'm most proud of with the adoption of this tool is that there's far more farmers, smallholder farmers outside of the Americas using these products where they have been transformational to the production of corn or the production of cotton, where they've given growers tools for controlling insects and weeds that has never existed before. In fact, if you look at the productivity gains, they've been pretty incredible. Last year, as you know, was a record year for corn and soybean production in the U.S. So I kind of got into the data and had a lot of our statisticians go back and look at, the state by state and the country by country curves, and you can see the phenomenal, uptick in proliferation of yields in the U.S. And I looked at it for every state, whether it's Illinois, Indiana, Nebraska, South Dakota, and compared that to countries where the technology has not been adopted, and you can see that there's been a huge gain in productivity, but also this means an important gain in sustainable intensification. The fact that we can grow corn in Nebraska and get 190 bushel yields with the same amount of or less of nutrients, crop chemicals and water that we did 30 years ago is a tremendous gain in productivity, which will be increasingly important as we see the benefits of this technology flow globally. There's a lot of conversations around the benefits of GMO crops, and I've written a lot about it. What's nice is this is an independent summary that was published just before last Christmas by 2 German economists that was actually funded by the German government, and this was probably the most detailed study. It's a large meta-analysis of over 100 studies, and they basically concluded independently, and as you know, Germany hasn't probably been the greatest friend of GMO science, but their results were, on average, if you look at all the data that's been published, the technology has increased yields by 20%. Importantly, it's reduced pesticide use by 30%, and it's been a big boost to farmer productivity. And frankly, that's why 95% of the corn and soybean producers in this country have utilized the technology, because of these economic and incredible environmental benefits. But the thing I would highlight, lastly, as I kind of close this part of the commentary, is I am incredibly proud of the safety record that this technology has had. If you kind of reel back with me, the first gene transfer experiment ever done was done in the 1970s. We made the first transgenic crops in the 1980s and field tested them. We commercialized them in the 1990s. So depending on where you want to pick at this as a starting point, we've had 30 years of experience with genetic modification of crops using recombinant DNA methods. And in that entire history, there's not been there's been 0 food or feed safety issues with the technology. And that's really a reflection of 2 things. We are talking about genetic modification the same way people have been genetically modifying crops from the beginning of time, by moving genes and changing the proteins they produce. And on top of that, we undoubtedly have the most sophisticated safety testing system with the FDA, USDA, and EPA, and all of the regulatory bodies in the import countries who've looked at this technology and affirmed that its safety and its validity. So, it's come a long way, but we all know that there's a lot of dialogue to have, and it's really important that we're prepared to engage in that dialogue. And that's a point that I'll make several times. And I see the vast majority of people in this country interested and open to that dialogue. There's extreme voices on either side. There's critics and there's advocates. But the vast majority of people are interested in understanding where their food comes from, its safety, its nutrition, its affordability. And that's a dialogue that I think all of us should be able to engage in. As a company, I would tell you, historically, we probably have not spent as much time focusing on the consumer as we should have. I can remember when we first launched Roundup Ready soybeans and Yield Guard corn, we were all excited. We'd gotten the regulatory approvals. We'd done all the things that you were required to do to get product approval in the country and around the world. And we put all of our energy into talking to farmers and educating them about the benefits of the technology. And we, in retrospect, we didn't spend the amount of time we should have in terms of reaching out to the consumer. And about 2 or 3 years ago, we started to change that in terms of redirecting our communication efforts, to the consumer, to the millennial, to the food-minded person in society who's interested in the discussion. We've opened up a lot of information channels through social media, through websites, and I spend a lot of my time in debates and discussions and candid dialogues around the importance of innovation in agriculture and the food chain. We've put out commercials, and not only and when I talk about we, it's the big we. It's lots of other companies in this industry, but it's also food companies who more and more are realizing that we all have a responsibility to talk to people about the important role that innovation in agriculture and food production will have meeting that challenge of doubling the food supply in the next 30 years. So just as a little bit of background here, here's some of the commercials that we're running if you haven't had a chance to see these. Forward. There we go.
From the very beginning, food is more than just a meal. It's the way we care for one another. It's the way we celebrate. Food is love. Population grows, food becomes the way we care for people we may never even meet. It's also part of how we take care of the planet. At Monsanto, we believe everyone deserves the love that comes from a balanced meal. And all of us deserve agriculture that provides for a sustainable future. It's time for a bigger discussion about food. Be part of the conversation at discover.monsanto.com.
So that just gives you a flavor for some of the things we're doing, and if anyone interested in a follow-up, on your in front of you, copy of my business card, so you can always reach me by email or on Twitter if you have any questions. But on the thumb drive, I put in a lot of the things that we use in terms of the background documents on GMO safety, on communication, videos, some of the outreach that I've done, some of the articles I've written, because I think it's really important to share. And one of the things I really emphasized, and Ronnie, I know you're probably tired of me talking about this today, is how important that we balance all of the great science and innovation that we're doing in companies and here in a university with an equally strong commitment to the communication, because all of us have that responsibility to reach out. And again, I thank you for the funding, the opportunity for this type of communication vehicle. I'm going to shift gears and just give you a little bit of sense of some of the things I'm excited about from a biotech front and make a connection here. Probably the coolest technology we've launched in the last couple of years is Drought Guard. This is the first biotech trait targeted for drought protection, and we really couple a biotech trait with the breeding advances for drought tolerance. This technology has been really successful. We basically sold out all of our Drought Guard seed this year, and it's been, the performance has been so strong under both drought and non-drought conditions that this year we made the decision to move it across the Midwest, because there's sandy soils and water-prone areas, or the opportunity to substitute a gene for irrigation that has a lot of benefit. The reason I highlight Drought Guard is that a lot of the work in the irrigation side and the product positioning was done here in Nebraska, at our research facility in Gothenburg. And as you know, Gothenburg has been a great connection with the university and with our Water for Food program that you have here, and we've shared a lot of people and personnel, and I think there's an opportunity to elevate that in the future as we think about the role that precision ag and the sensors have in making us even more frugal in our use of water and squeezing that last drop of water into yield. The other important part about the project is it has significant repercussions globally, where the challenge for growing crops with reduced water is severe everywhere, and particularly in Africa. Africa, when you look at all the climate models, will probably be the countries most hard hit by changing climate. And we've worked in a large collaboration with CIMMYT and the Gates Foundation to create the breeding and provided the biotech tools to develop corn specifically for that sub-Saharan market and customer base that needs that drought-protected corn. Very much in the start of the development of these technologies, but already seeing fantastic yield gains of having dedicated targeted breeding for important crops. And I see this as a model where we can bring the best of these tools for other orphan or smallholder crops that I think can have a big opportunity. And I think that's an opportunity again for collaboration with the university, because we all share a passion for how we bring the benefits of this technology globally. So drought tolerance is one example where we'll continue to see innovation. The other one I just highlight SmartStax Pro, and there's a connection with drought tolerance, because as we bring the drought tolerance trait into the Midwest, it will be done in the SmartStax Pro genetics, which contains multiple genes for rootworm, corn borer, and herbicide tolerance. SmartStax Pro with Drought Guard will be a 10-gene stack of 10 different biotech traits. So it shows you the progression of the technology for the future. But the science here that's exciting, and you can probably see the plant roots on the right that are more robust. That's the new SmartStax Pro technology, and it's the first of the insect control traits that uses something other than a Bt gene. This actually uses the new RNAi technology, where we've looked at the genes in the rootworm itself that can be inactivated by an RNAi and then express that gene into the plant. So it's not only a technological feat from the point of view of multiple genes, but now new modes of action, and that's pretty exciting. And a lot of the work that shows that these Drought Guard and SmartStax Pro hybrids perform better and better. Again, we're done here in our Nebraska research facilities. The last piece of science I wanted to talk about really relates to partnering. So I'm very privileged to lead a research group at Monsanto that has about 5,000 scientists and has the opportunity to develop a lot of areas. But I can tell you, as I travel around universities and countries and governments around the world, ranging from the research institutes outside of Beijing to brand new centers like what you have here, there's a lot of really, really bright people, and and a real, I think, part of our success has been creating the partnerships and the relationships that have enabled us to take ideas from everywhere, whether it's individual professors or small companies or partnerships with big companies. So several years ago, we formed a collaboration with Don Weeks. I think all of you know Don, and Don, you're probably here in the audience somewhere. There he is. I just wanted to shout out and say thank you for the long collaboration we had, because many, many years ago, Don discovered the mechanism for creating tolerance to dicamba, a very effective herbicide, and by building in that selectivity in the plant, we can complement the the benefits we've seen with our Roundup Ready technology and provide growers with a technology that has the benefit to continue to address weed control around the country. So Don's discovery of this gene has now been introduced into cotton, corn, soybean, canola, sugar beet, wheat, and I think we're looking at alfalfa. So we see it as a long-term partner with our Roundup Ready technology, which will enable growers to have multiple modes of action, so more durable and more effective weed control. So we thank you for a great collaboration and partnership. And just so you know where things stand, we launched the first cotton varieties this year. We sold out on 500,000 acres of the technology, and the soybean technology will get approved this year, and we expect it to be one of our largest biotech launches ever next year in 2016. So thank you so much. We've complemented your gene work with new formulations that have enabled the product to be used even more safely without any of the volatility that had been associated with the older versions of dicamba-based products. And so And then coupled that with a lot of training with growers in terms of nozzles and how to spray and when to spray, and apps on your iPhone that will tell you, how much wind speed and what's the sprayable time during the day, so that these products can be used for a long time very safely and very effectively. And again, it's a really, I think, an incredible example of of a long-standing public-private partnership that's going to create huge benefit for farmers for the future. Couple last areas I would just talk about, and I'll do this very briefly, that I'm really excited about, that I think are going to create incredible opportunity. And I would say all of the tools that we focused on historically in all the applications have been on the crop genes and genetics side. The technology now has great applicability for studying soil health and the microbial diversity. And we got started through the acquisition of a company that Craig Venter had founded. And Craig was a scientist who was studying all the microbiome in deep sea ocean vents and other cool places that he could travel to around the world. But he developed the techniques where you could just literally sequence a teaspoon of dirt, sequence all of the genes, deduce the genome structure, reconstitute the map of all the diversity of microbes, and use that as a way of fingerprinting individual fields and farms and understanding and correlating which microbes there actually are colonizing those roots, protecting it from the plant from diseases or insects, or serving as microfactories to deliver nutrients. And so those tools are being advanced through some other partnerships and collaborations. And last year, we did one of the largest field tests of microbes, and you can see here that we did over 170,000 yield plots in corn and soybean, and could identify microbes that were adding significant yield boosts to corn and soybean. And I think this is going to tie nicely to the overall precision ag capability, because my belief is just like that corn hybrid will have very specific field preferences in terms of individual fields, that microbial inoculum, that seed treatment that creates that probiotic for the corn or soybean plant, is also going to be very field specific, and we now have the data and the capability to analyze that. Last area I'd just highlight from a biology side is the work that's going on in BioDirect, and this takes advantage of the recent discovery of that new regulatory mechanism based on RNAis. And basically, I would describe it this way: everything I've talked to you about in terms of biotech has been done by putting a gene in a plant that makes an RNA that makes a protein, whether it's for weed control or bug control. With the discovery of RNAi, we demonstrated that we could actually produce enough of these small RNAi molecules in the lab that we could spray them on plants or pests and use that gene-specific knockout mechanism to provide for pest control or weed control or gene-specific modifications. And this has the benefit of being a naturally occurring molecule. It's not a permanent genetic modification, so it's not a GMO, yet it has those same gene-specific benefits in terms of a temporal application. And so a couple of the areas that this kind of describes the model. So large-scale production of specific RNAi molecules that are targeted for particular genes in the pest or the crop that can either be serving as a biological pesticide or as a plant growth enhancer for the future, and then being able to work through the delivery systems. So a couple of the examples that I think are pretty exciting and will probably be the first generation of RNAi products in agriculture involve better ways of controlling pests. So you've all heard about colony collapse disorder with the bee population. And there's been lots of theories of what causes colony collapse, and some people think it's been GMO crops and some think it's been pesticides. I think most scientists would tell you that it's the varroa mite. So there's a mite that latches onto the bee, that drains the bee of all of its vital nutrients, and then injects into the bee viruses. So you see the picture. These little brown mites are pretty good size, and they're infecting hives. What we've been able to do is basically create RNAi molecules that recognize key genes in the mite, but are not recognized by the bee itself. And we can go one step further. We can also design RNAi molecules that knock out each of the 10 or 12 viruses that the mite might inject into the bee and then provide a diet nutrient in the hive that allows us to see improvements. And you can see the plus and minus BioDirect, where we've been able, to enhance colony survival using these methods. So pretty exciting science that could only be done with the specificity of a biological pesticide that only recognizes the mite and not the bee and the virus and not other beneficials. So pretty cool. And then the example on the right that you probably can't see is, studying an insect like a Colorado potato beetle or flea beetles. The beetles tend to be particularly susceptible to RNAis. You can see the plants on the right were sprayed with about 1 milligram per acre of an RNAi and protected. The ones on the left, which were not protected and untreated, were destroyed. And so this opens up a whole new way of using the science of biotechnology to address key challenging problems in agriculture that doesn't have some of the stigma, doesn't have some of the regulatory, intensive regulatory studies and costs that we would normally associate with a GMO. Last area I'll talk about briefly, and I've had a chance to talk to many of you about it, is just the phenomenal advances that are occurring with, with the digitization of the farm. The agricultural industry is really the last industry, when you think about it, to undergo the enhancements from data science, and it's going to be absolutely incredible. And we now have satellites with spectroscopic intercepts, and the opportunity to use drones and sensors and data feeds off of equipment to provide for farmers, much more effective tools for their decision making and to manage their operations. I always use a couple of analogies. Today's tractor has more computational power than the first spaceships that went to the moon. So that's one thought. The average car that sold today has somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 sensors in it. And it's not just the, what's the oil temperature and the radiator temperature, but, the ones that drive me crazy are the cameras on the mirrors that tell you when you're going over the white line and the yellow line, and, and then who's behind you and what's ahead. The point is, that same technology is now being built into our farming equipment, and our cultivators and our planters are going to give us soil moisture. They're going to give us organic matter. They'll probably be telling us everything from nutrient variability in the field to literally maybe even a real-time look at what's the content of cyst nematode eggs or rootworm eggs in a given portion of a field. And that information is going to be filtered into all of our grower decisions and provide for a better decision-making process, and that's really exciting. So a few years ago, we made an acquisition of a company in California called the Climate Corporation, who's really been a leader in terms of the utilization of very sophisticated weather mapping and geospatial outlining of the 29 million fields in the United States, and are now moving to provide really sub-field information in terms of soil type and agronomic practices. And creating, I think, some really useful tools. Nitrogen Advisor is particularly important because it really, using weather information and climate conditions and soil conditions, you can model the dissipation of nitrogen in a field during the production of a crop, and use that information to make rational economic decisions in terms of, do additional nitrogen treatments or side dressings make economic sense? Do they make environmental sense? And use that information with a variety of agronomic practices to both optimize production but minimize input, which is really so key to the future. The field health is really a service that gives a satellite image of every field once a week, and use that information to determine whether the irrigator is working properly, whether the field is experiencing a pest problem, and those are the kind of tools that I think are coming that really integrate the combination of the best seeds, the best traits, the agronomic practices for farmers to make better decisions. So with that, I'm going to close and just say again, thank you for the attention and the opportunity. And again, I really urge you to think hard about your ability to impact and outreach, because today probably less than 1% of the U.S. population is involved in agriculture, and we really have the responsibility and I think the obligation to reach out to the other 99% and tell our story in terms of what, food security and providing for a better outcome in terms of agriculture and its impact on the environment can be, and the passion and the concern that we all show for that important mission. So with that, thanks. I'll be happy if we have a little bit of time, Ronnie, to do a few questions or follow up later on. Thanks again for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
So we have about 15 or 20 minutes for open floor questions for Dr. Fraley. So there will be mics. Jill Brown has a mic on this side. Spencer Hartman up top in the back has a mic for this side. So if you have a question, raise your hand. They'll come to you. I think W. Don Nelson has one up top.
Thanks again. Thank you. Appreciate it.
In the area of genetic research, speculate over the next 3 decades as to what role, if any, the trait for perennialism will play in feed grain research in North America.
Great questions. If you couldn't hear it, I think the heart of the question was what role will perennial crops or perennialism traits play in agriculture in a broad sense over the next several decades? Well, one I can tell you most certainly is a lot of the traits that we screen in terms of attributes around increasing yield or disease or stress response comes from a broad base of genetics and genomes, including perennial crops or perennial ancestors to our current commercial crops. Like, for example, going back to sources of genes in teosinte that could benefit modern corn hybrids and things like that. So I think that's one area where we'll see continued utilization of the traits, and to a certain extent some of the both transgenic traits, but also, as I said, breeding traits. Another area where I see a lot of interest is in the area of cover crops. And I think cover crops are going to be important in terms of reducing both pesticide, nutrition load, and improving water quality. And so a lot of the opportunities with appropriate selection of cover crops will be a key for us as we think about addressing some of the challenges that agriculture faces. So those are a couple of examples that I see. In terms of domestication of other crops, there's a lot of folks who are interested in that and passionate. We do some of that, and as I said, mostly as a source of genes. Thanks. Sure.
One right here.
Thanks for your talk. My question is regarding your closing remarks, or at least the slides where you close your presentation, and it's about data. So we are producing a lot of data. I'm a little bit dubious about if we are producing the right information, which is the translation of the data into the information that could be useful for people. What is the scenario where you think we currently are? What is the scenario that you see in the future in terms of sharing data?
Sure.
And what would be the role between a company like Monsanto and the university? How do you see the real partnership in order to move this forward?
Great, and very important question. And so I'll give you a couple of quick responses, and then maybe afterwards we can follow it in more depth. So, as you know, I do lots of talks with farmers. And I would say the general characterization of a farmer's view is they are awash in data, and they gain very little insight from all the yield maps and soil maps, and they are looking for people to turn that data into useful algorithms that can be deployed in real life in their farming situations. I would tell you, having been around from the early days of Roundup Ready soybeans to corn rootworm traits, when I talk to farmers today, there's probably as much excitement about precision ag and what these tools can do, because they all realize that they can do their farming operations better if they just could understand that data. So there's a huge amount of interest. So that's kind of the background. This is clearly, there's a huge demand for it, and it's up to us to provide the solutions that work simply in a farming operation. In terms of the data perspective, there's been a lot of dialogue about data and data use in agriculture. And I'll just tell you what our position is, and I'll give the full credit to that to Dave Freeberg, who's the CEO of the Climate Corporation, and he was a Google executive and founded the Climate Corporation, and brought a very strong belief that these systems needed to be open architecture, that they needed to have common access, so that the seed worked with red and green equipment and vice versa, so that everybody could share that data, because it's in the best interest of the grower if there's interoperability of the data in common systems. So our philosophy is very simple, and just cut to the chase. Big question: who owns the data? Our view, it's the grower who owns the data, and it gets kind of tricky, because does that mean it's the landlord's data? What happens if there's data breaches? Is it the government's data if that grower is audited? So there's a lot of tricky questions, but our fundamental view, it's the grower's data. We ask permission for that grower to use the data, and we would say specifically, if you sign up, we'll use that data for a field health advisor, for a nitrogen advisor. If our scientists come up with another good app, we'll ask the grower whether they want their data to be used for another purpose. That's their choice. If the grower says, the guys down the street have a better software program than you do, then that data should be taken out of our system and used in the other system. So that's basically the philosophy that we've generated, and that's all been written down, and it's part of our open data access policy. Thanks for the question.
Brent Paul, up in the back.
Sure.
Dr. Fraley, first a comment and then a question. Thank you very much for a very wonderful presentation and giving a tremendous overview. And
well, I thank you for creating and helping to create such a beautiful place to talk.
Yeah. The comment is that I'm thrilled to hear that our partnership on dicamba resistant technology is already in the marketplace, and we're very excited about the collaboration and the impact that it'll have on society. My question is that it relates to GMO. I follow you on Twitter and others on social media, and GMO, there's a lot of conversation, at least going back 10, 20 years ago. There seemed to be a lot of resistance, opposition especially in European Union. It appears from the recent dialogue that is changed. So would you be willing to comment on that, how this societal acceptance is improved?
Yeah, and unfortunately that's a question that never has an easy answer. Let me give you a couple of different ways I think about it. So one I mentioned in my talk, there has been controversy around GMOs. On the other hand, it is the most rapidly adopted technology in the history of agriculture in terms of the time frame and its adoption. So, we've seen challenges, but we've also seen, great deal of interest, and I think that interest continues to progress. There's no doubt, if we now focus on the U.S. consumer, I mentioned, there's extreme folks who don't like GMOs, don't like chemicals, don't like agriculture, don't like agricultural companies, don't like Monsanto, and that's clear. If you look at the 80 or 90% of the people in the middle, and you look at their concerns around food or food security, GMOs does not make the list. But it can be sensitized. So I think we make progress there, and I view that as it is our responsibility to reach that group in the middle and communicate the facts, and there's a huge deal of interest on it. Around the world, I think the attitudes towards GMOs, continue to get better. I mean, China's making huge investments in the GMO technology. They're probably spending more money in this science than anybody outside the U.S., and it's debatable on whether they're outspending the U.S. today. We're seeing countries now start to adopt. I just mentioned that Thailand is going to approve the corn technology. Nigeria just voted yesterday to move forward with the technology. So I think we're seeing that progression. And even in the EU, the dynamic is changing dramatically. And with the EU, you have to step back and really understand what's going on in the EU. So a lot of people think that the GMOs are all banned in the EU, and that's been the soundbite. What you have to appreciate is that the EU is not self-sufficient in grain production. So all of the corn and soybean that's imported from the Americas to support the feed and food chain in the EU is all GMO crops. So they've gotten all the approvals from EFSA. They are used extensively in the food and feed chain. Unfortunately, there's a ban on planting, which doesn't make any sense since these products are been shown to be safe, they've been approved, and they're actually used in the food and feed chain, but the farmers don't get the economic benefit. With the changing regulations that are going on in Europe, some people believe now that certain countries like England and others will move forward with the technology. So I hope that happens. I mean, it's very much a very unique and ironic situation in the EU, given the incredible demand on imports, yet the barriers to farmer utilization. Thanks for the question. Sorry it wasn't an easier answer.
Don Reynolds up top.
Thank you. In terms of efficiency that you alluded to early in your talk, how much emphasis or how much advancement has been put on increasing the nutrient value of the crop residue to be used in animal feeds and foraging, et cetera?
Yeah, great question. And as a company, we've done a lot of work. In fact, I helped oversee what was almost a 10-year joint venture with Cargill looking at nutrient alteration in corn and soybean, and we studied and looked at all the vitamin and amino acid pathways, and out of that project came two that are moving forward to commercialization. One is the changing of the fatty acid composition in soybean to basically turn soybean oil into olive oil with the high oleic oil. So that is within a year or so of commercial advancement in this country. And then the omega-3 production in soybean, which has benefits for both human food and animal feed as a nutrition source. So those have been our two main projects. We looked at a lot of the individual amino acids and vitamins, and it ultimately came to the conclusion that if we simply increase yield per acre, there were a lot of smart companies out there that were fractionating amino acids or producing vitamins, and our biggest contribution would come if we simply could dramatically increase yield. And so we've continued to look for those exceptional opportunities for value creation for a user, but have really put the bulk of our effort onto producing more with less.
Jill, I think you have another right here.
I do, and there's a number of questions online too. Most of them center around UAVs and whether or not farmers should be looking at adopting that technology now, or what your future forecast is on those.
I love the UAV stuff, and obviously we're getting a step closer to being able to use that technology on farm and across the U.S. And we've been doing studies to understand what are the basic spectroscopic and camera and other tools to use that. I really think it's a blend of multiple tools. So satellites are great in terms of covering big area, but you're looking at a resolution of 10 to 15 feet in general. The beauty of a UAV is you can get plant-specific information, and you can look at everything from planting density to probably diagnosing the insects on a leaf, and so that's got huge power. And in between, the opportunity for airplanes, is also significant. I think it's really a race between those spectroscopic tools and the sensors. I know I was just out in Silicon Valley a couple weeks ago, and I was in a room about this size and had venture capitalists and folks involved in the electronics industry and in the Silicon Valley. I asked them about how many of them were involved in agriculture, and about half the hands in the room went up. So the use of robotics and sensors in agriculture is also going to explode. And I think what the beauty of it is we are going to be blessed with tools that are going to give us an extreme amount of information and precision. And we're still gonna have to wait and see which of these technologies evolves to be the most effective and the simple. But I'm absolutely convinced that they will change the game. So I think flying a UAV could be a good hobby for the farmer too. And there's certainly applications that I think would be pretty interesting and pretty fun. So that'd be great.
We'll take one more question and then
Sure.
maybe two, and
Yep.
we need to get Dr. Fraley on the road. Up top here.
My question pertains to your partnership with Novozymes. Specifically, you mentioned seed treatments and being able to inoculate the seed with certain microbial strains that increase yield. Do you ever foresee a future where we have such a great understanding of soil microbiology that we can actually increase nutrient availability to the plant and decrease our dependence on synthetic fertilizers?
Yeah, I think that's possible. I mean, in terms of the microbes, many of those are clearly providing micronutrients and helping to solubilize in order to provide for an increased, local concentration of the nutrient on the root surface. And I think, when we think about the microbes, we're still at the very beginning stages, but, being able to think through, which microbes work in which field the best. And, one of the things we're understanding is that the microbial population is extremely dependent on, prior crop history and soil types and past treatment regimes. And in all likelihood, it's going to be a very tailored fit of multiple microbes that really optimize the soil health of a given field. But I would say all of the studies that you see basically show that the yield benefit of the microbe either comes from enhanced nutrition or it comes from enhanced pest control. And so nutrition's a big part of it. And and I think it interplays with that whole set of data science tools. I mean, I think when I grew up in the Midwest in Illinois, it was a pretty standard rule. You put down 125 pounds of nitrogen in the fall, and then you planted your crop the next spring. Today, the equipment has changed, the technology's changed, the forms of nutrients have changed, and, we can be a lot smarter. And we also know that the genetics of the modern corn that is being developed today is compatible with nitrogen uptake all the way through the filling of the ear. So being able to meter out that nitrogen, to be able to minimize some of the challenges from unintended dissipation, be able to apply it when the crop needs it the most, I think really opens the door for being smarter economically on the use of nitrogen and more efficient from an environmental perspective to reduce some of the challenges that we face with with water contamination and economic loss. I think we'll see a lot of the rules around plant nutrition be rewritten, both with the new tools and the new genetics. Thanks for the question.
Gentleman yielded to this gentleman.
You're going to have to tell me what the deal is here later on. Thanks, sure.
My question is, with the challenges and opportunities that you talk about between now and 2050, there's going to be a lot of new scientists that are going to be needed. And in your perspective, from where you are in your company, what are some of the skill sets and some of the disciplines, the knowledge, the things that you think a graduate student now would be most beneficial to gain by the time he graduates to enter into a company?
All right, I'll do this real quick and at a high level. I'll tell you the things that I look for today. So one of our hardest skill sets is to combine the knowledge of multiple disciplines. So today's plant breeder needs to be able to understand the agronomy and physiology of the crop, but almost all the breeding is done with markers and breeding algorithms, and requires a lot of data science capability. So I would say wherever you can, bringing the biology and the data science together, it's changing everything we do. I mean, we couldn't sequence all of these genomes, keep track of all the different, components and factors in the soil, or whether it's in a crop or a microbial genome, without the data science tools. Now, those tools are getting easier, but having that intuitive background is really key. The other one I would emphasize, and I talked about it a lot today with faculty here, is, I describe it this way: is almost all the research that we do is in a team-based environment where you're bringing together, a biologist with a plant breeder, with a regulator, with a lawyer, you name your disciplines, in order to create today's modern products. And one of the things that's so exciting to see what's going on here in the campus is you are bringing together those multiple disciplines. And my experience is great things happen when you bring together people who have that cross-disciplinary experience, but what that requires is outstanding communication skills. I describe it this way: what gets people the interview for the job is their knowledge and their skill set. What actually gets them the job is their ability to communicate and work effectively in a team. So I would really emphasize the information technology skills on the hard skill set and the communication skills on the soft skill set. Thanks, appreciate it.
Please join me in giving Dr. Fraley our appreciation.
Appreciate it.
So we have a tradition in the Hermann Lectures of presenting each of our lecturers with a medal that depicts an emblem of the tree of life associated with food and agriculture. So Rob, is a memento to remember this by.
Wow.
Thank you very much for a great lecture and for being with us today.
I appreciate that so much. I see that ear of corn and that soybean pod right there, so it's great. And the cow. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.